Zari's hands were shaking, but she didn't stop. Her small palms pressed down again and again on the chest of the unconscious man, sprawled across the luxury white leather seat in first class. 1, 2, 3, she whispered under her breath. Her voice trembled as much as her arms did. The plane jolted again, throwing someone's bag from the overhead compartment. The cabin lights flickered. Oxygen masks dropped from above like vines in a storm. Screams erupted around her. Panicked passengers, flight attendants yelling for calm, someone crying behind her. But all Zari could hear was the fading breath of the man beneath her hands. He was a tall, silver-haired white man in an expensive black suit. A man who hadn't said a single word to her when their eyes met hours earlier. A man who looked at her like she didn't belong on the same planet, let alone the same flight. And now she was the only thing keeping him alive. "Don't you die!" she choked out, trying to stay steady. "You don't get to leave. Not until you tell me why you were watching me. Not until you explain that picture." Another push, another breath. A flight attendant hovered behind her with an emergency oxygen tank and wide eyes. "Sweetheart, step back. We've got it now." But the man's lips moved. Barely. Zari froze, leaning in close. "Forgive," he whispered. Her breath caught. She stared at him. "What? Forgive who? Why?" But his eyes were rolling back. He wasn't going to say anything else. "Defib, now!" a male voice called behind her. Zari stumbled back as the crew took over, someone guiding her away, someone shouting for a doctor, anyone with medical experience. She couldn't hear anything else. Not really. Just that one word. Forgive. And the picture. The photo he dropped earlier, the one she still had hidden in the back of her book. The one with her mother in it, and her father, or who she thought was her father. But the man in that photo standing next to her mom wasn't black. He was him. The man now unconscious in front of her. Zari backed away until her legs hit the edge of her seat. She sat down hard, numb to the chaos around her. Her fingers clenched the frayed edge of the seatbelt strap as the plane rocked again. She wasn't supposed to be here. Not in first class. Not on this plane. Not holding on to a secret picture like it could burn through her bag at any moment. She was just a 12-year-old girl from East Baltimore. She wore a coat 2 sizes too big. She had $43 in her backpack and a folded-up letter from a London law firm she couldn't pronounce. She hadn't planned to save anyone's life today. She hadn't even planned to speak to anyone. And now, here she was. In the middle of the sky. In the middle of chaos. Trying to understand why a white man who had refused to look her in the eye was carrying a photo of her black mother. And maybe even worse. Why she looked like the woman in that photo. And maybe even more like the man who just called her to forgive him, with his last breath. The plane shook again, and someone screamed up front. A flight attendant ran past. Another held a phone to her ear, trying to reach the ground. Someone was yelling, "Prepare for emergency landing!" But Zari didn't move. She couldn't. She was still staring at the place where the man had collapsed. The place where she'd just been kneeling, trying to keep him alive. She didn't even know his name. But somehow, he knew hers. Not because he said it. Not out loud. But in the way he looked at her before the panic started. That long, cold stare when she walked onto the plane. That flicker of surprise. Recognition, even. Before he turned away and pulled down his eye mask like she didn't exist. But she did. And now she had a piece of something she didn't understand yet. She reached into her bag, slowly, quietly, like the world had narrowed into one tight circle. Her fingers brushed past her book, The Secret Garden, her favorite. It used to be her dad's. She opened the back cover and pulled out the folded paper she'd picked up near the curtain separating first class from economy. She had told herself she'd give it back, until she opened it and saw the truth. The photo was old, creased at the corners. A black woman in a yellow dress stood in front of a row house porch, smiling. Zari knew that smile. She'd seen it in a shoebox of pictures her grandma kept under the bed. She'd seen it in the mirror. Next to the woman stood a white man, tall, clean-cut, confident. His arm around her waist like they belonged together. Like he knew her. Like they were something more than a stranger's memory. Zari folded the photo again quickly, her hands sweating now. She'd tried to ignore the gut feeling when she saw him the first time, when their eyes met, when his face tensed, when she thought, just for a second, he looks like someone. Now she couldn't ignore it anymore. Who was he? And why did he have a photo of her mother? And why? Did she believe him when he said, "Forgive"? The plane tilted again. An overhead bin popped open, spilling a laptop into the aisle. But Zari didn't flinch, because in that moment, turbulence wasn't her biggest problem. The truth was, and she wasn't ready for it. 3 hours earlier, Zari stood on the edge of the boarding tunnel, her fingers tightening around the frayed strap of her second-hand backpack. People behind her murmured impatiently, but she didn't move. Her sneakers felt glued to the floor. It wasn't the flight that scared her. It was everything that came after. A voice from behind nudged her forward. "Go on, sweetheart. They're waiting." She stepped onto the plane. It smelled like leather and lemon cleaner, like money, like something that didn't belong to her. Zari had never been on a plane before, never left Baltimore, never seen so many white faces in one place. The flight attendants smiled too wide. The seats looked like movie props, and she could feel every pair of eyes sizing her up, like she was the one mistake the airline let slip through the system. She didn't care. She was here because she had no choice. A letter came last week. Heavy paper. No return address. Just the words, "You are requested in London regarding a private inheritance matter. Your expenses are covered. Travel alone. Discretion required." Grandma thought it was a scam. Zari wasn't so sure. The letter knew things no one else could. Her father's full name, where he worked before he died, what year he got that scholarship from Howard University. It even had the old apartment number they lived in before the fire. Too many facts to be fake. So here she was, going to London, with nothing but her backpack, her favorite book, and a growing pit in her stomach. She handed her boarding pass to the flight attendant. The woman glanced down, then back up. "You're in seat 14A, she said, trying to keep her smile warm. "You flying alone?" Zari nodded once. No words, just a polite stare. "Well," the woman said gently, "let's get you seated." As they passed through first class, Zari felt it again, that heat on the back of her neck. People didn't stare directly, but they didn't need to. She could feel it in their silence, their little head tilts, the way they clutched purses tighter or avoided eye contact. Like she didn't belong here. One man, though, did look at her. He sat perfectly still by the window, hands folded, suit crisp. He looked important and angry, like being on a plane with other people was beneath him. His eyes were cold, but they stayed locked on hers as she walked past. For a second, something flickered behind his expression. Not judgment. Recognition. She looked away first, but not before his jaw clenched, and not before his eyes lingered a little too long. Her seat was near the back, beside a window. The row was empty. Small mercy. She sat down, stuffed her bag beneath the seat, and pulled out her book, The Secret Garden, the one her dad gave her before he died. It still smelled like him. Peppermint, motor oil, old library air. The plane filled slowly. Zari stared at her page but didn't read a word. All she could see was the man in the suit. Why had he looked at her like that? And why did her stomach twist when he did? 30 minutes passed. Then something happened. She heard his voice. It carried across first class, sharp and disgusted. "This is unacceptable," he snapped at a flight attendant. "I requested an empty seat beside me. I don't sit next to strangers." "I'm sorry, sir," the attendant replied calmly. "It's a full flight." He turned to the man beside him, a quiet, older Asian man, and hissed, "Do you know who I am?" The other man didn't flinch. "I do. And I'm happy to move, if it helps." "That's not the point," the white man growled. "It's about respect." Zari rolled her eyes. Rich people problems. She glanced up again. He was still there, still irritated, still glaring. And when their eyes met this time, he didn't look away. Neither did she. He blinked first. She smiled. Just a little. But something still didn't sit right. As the plane taxied, Zari looked back through her window and whispered to no one, "You saw me, didn't you?" Because she was starting to think he had. And not just on this flight. Zari was mid-sentence in her book when something fluttered across the corner of her vision. A small folded piece of paper had drifted down the aisle like a feather, landing just past the curtain that separated first class from economy. She blinked. No one else noticed. The flight attendants were passing out drinks. The rich folks up front were sipping wine like turbulence didn't exist. She stood up, glanced around, then stepped into the aisle. Her hand reached for it, half curious, half automatic. It was creased, soft at the edges, like it had been opened and closed 100 times. She turned it over. No name, no stamp, just one deep fold. She shouldn't open it. She opened it, and time stopped. It was a photo. A couple stood on a porch, black woman, white man, arms around each other, smiling, not posing, not forced. The woman wore a yellow dress. Zari's heart cracked. That was her mother. Younger, happier, with her hair in tight curls and that exact dimple on her right cheek, the one Zari used to poke as a kid to make her laugh. But the man beside her? Zari had never seen him before. Except she had. Today. He was the one in the window seat of first class. Same silver hair. Same sharp jawline. Same eyes that had looked at her like he'd seen a ghost. She folded the picture fast, hands trembling. She shoved it into the back of her book, barely able to breathe. What was he doing with that? Why would some rich white man, who acted like she was a stain on his flight, have a photo of her mother? And where was her father in the picture? She sat down slowly, pressing her knees together to stop them from shaking. She remembered what Grandma always said. "Baby, the world's not always fair to girls like us." Zari thought that meant race. Maybe it meant secrets, too. A few rows ahead, someone stood up. She glanced over. It was him. He was walking toward the front lavatory. Not in a hurry. not looking around. But her heart flipped when he passed the curtain and looked right at her again. Brief, cold, but long enough. He didn't see the panic in her eyes. He didn't know she had it. The photo. The truth. Or maybe he did. She watched him vanish into the bathroom and realized something else. He hadn't noticed the paper fall. Or maybe he had, and didn't want to draw attention. Either way, he didn't stop. Zari sat frozen. What was she supposed to do? Give it back? Say nothing? Pretend she didn't see it? Her fingers itched to open it again. Look at her mother's face one more time. Study that man's smile. But her stomach was twisting too tight for her to move. The bathroom door clicked open. He came out. She held her breath. He paused. He was patting his jacket pocket. His forehead creased. Searching. He looked around the floor, turned in a slow circle, eyes narrow, mouth tense. He knew. Zari ducked low in her seat, heart hammering. He knew he lost it. But he didn't know who found it. And she wasn't about to tell him. Not yet. Her brain was spinning. If this was real, if that photo was her mom, and if this man somehow knew her, what did it mean? Why had Grandma never mentioned him? Was this about the inheritance? The mysterious letter? Was he the reason she was even on this plane? She pulled out her book again, slid the photo deeper inside the back cover, and snapped it shut. Then she stared straight ahead, pretending she hadn't just fallen into a hole she didn't know existed. A flight attendant passed by offering juice. Zari shook her head. She needed answers, not apple juice. She closed her eyes, but all she could see was that porch, her mom's smile, that white man's hand on her back, and the quiet certainty that her life had just split in two. The first bump didn't scare her. The second one made the lights flicker. The third sent a tray of drinks flying and made the entire cabin scream. The turbulence hit hard, like the sky had grabbed the plane and shaken it with both hands. Zari clutched her armrest, her book slipping to the floor. The flight attendants were shouting now, telling everyone to buckle in, hold tight. A woman behind her was crying. A man was shouting into his phone that it wouldn't send. The plane dipped sharply. Oxygen masks dropped down like vines again, swinging in front of her face. She didn't move. She was staring straight ahead. Because something was wrong in first class. She saw it. The man. He had stood up for a second, maybe to reach for something, and then, like a puppet with its strings cut, he dropped. Just collapsed. Flat out, across his own seat. His arm dangled off the edge like a lifeless rope. Someone screamed. A flight attendant bolted toward him. Another called for a doctor. "Medical emergency! Row 2!" someone shouted. Zari's breath caught in her throat. Her ears rang with pressure. The oxygen masks swayed. The plane was still rocking. But all she could think about was that picture in her book. That porch. That smile. And now, this man. This man who might be more than a stranger. This man who had dropped a photo that didn't belong to him. This man who might... She didn't think. She moved. Unbuckled her belt, ignored the yells to stay seated, and pushed her way toward the front. The crew tried to stop her. One woman stepped into the aisle, her arm outstretched. "I'm sorry! You can't!" "He's my..." Zari stopped herself. She didn't even know what he was. Instead, she said, "I can help." She squeezed past them and dropped to her knees beside his seat. His lips were pale, his eyes fluttering. He was barely breathing. Zari glanced up. "He needs CPR, now!" The flight attendant stammered. We're getting the defibrillator." Zari didn't wait. She placed both hands on his chest and started compressions. Hard, steady, focused. The world blurred around her. The plane jolted again. People screamed, but Zari kept going. "Come on," she muttered through clenched teeth. "Come on!" He gasped, just barely. His hand twitched. Zari leaned in. His lips moved. One word. "Photo." She froze. "What?" she whispered, leaning closer. He reached up, hand trembling, gripping her wrist with more strength than he should have had. His eyes opened halfway. "Forgive me," he breathed. Then he sagged again. Alarms started sounding. A flight attendant arrived with a defibrillator kit. Someone shouted for the oxygen tank. Another was calling the captain over the radio. Zari backed away as the professionals took over. Her heart pounded in her chest like it was trying to escape. "Who is she?" someone whispered from behind her. But she wasn't listening. Because his hand had reached for her. Not the flight crew. Not the other passengers. Just her. Like he knew. Like he'd been waiting. And then it hit her. He hadn't said "forgive me" as in regret. He said it like a request. A final request. Zari stood up slowly, her knees aching. A flight attendant gently tried to guide her back to her seat, but she shook her head. She turned and walked on her own. Back past the curtain. Back past the rows of staring eyes. Back to her seat in economy. She sat down, shaking. Her hands were numb. Her mouth was dry. She reached into her bag and pulled out the book. Her fingers fumbled through the pages until they hit the one that felt wrong. That felt heavier. The photo. She stared at it again. Her mom. That smile. That man. And now, this. "Forgive me," he said. But for what? Zari didn't cry. She didn't panic. She just sat there, locked in the eye of a storm that had nothing to do with the sky outside, and everything to do with the lie her life had been built around. Zari sat in a plastic airport chair, knees tucked under her, the photo clenched in one fist and her book in the other. They'd landed fast, emergency style, in a place called Gander. Canada, the pilot said, some airport in the middle of nowhere. The man had been taken off the plane on a stretcher, wrapped in wires and oxygen tubes. Paramedics moved fast. Too fast. No one told her his name. But Zari knew enough now that she didn't need it. She waited for someone to come talk to her. No one did. So she stood up. She walked to the airline counter where a tired woman was handing out hotel vouchers and trying to calm a restless crowd. "I need to make a phone call," Zari said, her voice soft but steady. The woman didn't even ask why. 10 minutes later, Zari was sitting in a quiet hallway, a cordless phone pressed to her ear, the line ringing. "James Patton Memorial Hospital," said a woman on the other end. Zari took a breath. A man was just brought in, off a flight, a heart issue. He was trying to speak to me before he passed out. "Are you a relative?" Zari hesitated. "Yes." The hold music started. Her fingers dug into her jeans. Finally, a man answered. Calm voice. Professional. You're calling about the patient from the transatlantic flight? Yes, I need to know if he's okay. He's stable for now. We've admitted him for observation. Zari exhaled. Is he conscious? Barely. But yes. We told him a family member called. Zari swallowed hard. Can I talk to him? A pause. I'll ask. She waited. Waited. Then the phone clicked. Static. And then... Zora! The voice was rough, breathless. But it was him. She nearly dropped the phone. I'm here, she said. There was silence for a few seconds, then, thank you for picking up the photo. She didn't answer that. Instead, she asked, who are you? A long breath. Then, my name is Walter Harrington. That meant nothing to her, until he said, I'm your father. Zari felt the floor disappear beneath her. Number. My dad died when I was 4. His name was James Williams. He raised you, Harrington said. I know. He was a good man. Better than I ever was. But biologically speaking, I'm your father. Zari stood, pacing now, eyes wide. That's not possible. It is. Her fingers tightened around the phone. Why would my mother lie? Why would my grandma lie? Because it was 1992, and your mother was a young black woman with a promising future, and I was married. White, powerful, and selfish. The words stung. Zari didn't even realize she was crying until the tears hit the floor. You knew I existed? Not at first. She didn't tell me. When I found out, it was too late. She'd already married James, already moved, already started over. Then why now? Zari demanded. Why the letter? Why the flight? Why follow me? Because your grandmother's sick, and because I didn't want to die with this secret. I've been watching from a distance for years, quietly. I gave money to your school, to the center where you went after class. I tried to help. You stalked me. Number, I protected you. As much as I could, from far away. But I was a coward, Zora. I let others decide who I was allowed to be in your life. Zari was silent. She hated him. And she didn't know why she didn't hang up. I need you to go to London, he said. I already was, she snapped, because of your stupid letter. There's a key in my jacket. I gave it to you. Did you find it? She had. Small, cold, hidden in her pocket since the plane. What's it for? A safety deposit box at Barclay Bank, Central London branch. There's a letter inside. From your mother. Zari froze. What kind of letter? She wrote it when she decided to leave. It explains everything. Her illness. Her fears. Why she made the choices she did. Zari could barely hear him now. Her ears were ringing, her chest tight. You expect me to just believe you, she whispered. No, he said quietly. I expect you to find your truth, even if it's not with me. Silence stretched between them like a rope about to snap. Then the nurse's voice came on. I'm sorry, but that's all he can handle. The line went dead. Zari stood still for a long time, then slowly opened her hand. The key was still there, and her whole world was about to change. The next morning, London didn't feel like a new city. It felt like a question waiting to be answered. Zari stood outside Barclay Bank, clutching the key so hard it left a mark in her palm. Her feet were tired, her mind exhausted, but her eyes were sharp now. She had come all this way not just for inheritance. She came for truth. A woman in a dark suit escorted her inside. No questions, just a nod at the key and a glance at her name on the firm's list. "Miss Williams," she said, unlocking a private room. "It's ready." The room was small. No windows. Just a chair, a table, and a metal box. Zari stepped inside slowly. Her hands trembled as she inserted the key. The lock clicked. Inside was a single sealed envelope. Cream paper. Her name written in elegant cursive. Zora. She sat down, tore it open, and read, "My sweet girl, if you are reading this, I am gone, or I am too far from the person I used to be to say these words out loud. Your grandmother will have raised you with strength, with love, but also with pain. I passed down to her like a burden. I'm sorry for that." Zari's hands shook harder. "You deserve to know the truth. You were born out of love. Not scandal. Not shame. Love. But that love was not meant for the world we lived in. Your biological father was a man named Walter Harrington, white, rich, promised the world. But when the world looked at us, all he saw was the risk. So I left. I married James Williams, your true father, in every way that counts. He loved you the moment he saw you, and you loved him back without even knowing why. When James died, I broke." Zari stopped reading. Her breath hitched. Tears blurred the ink, but she kept going. "I tried to hold it together for you, but inside I was unraveling. Fear, grief, and the weight of pretending everything was normal. I started seeing things, hearing things. They called it many names. Depression, psychosis. Maybe all of them were true. I left because I was scared I would become dangerous. To you." Zari blinked hard. She remembered the day her mom walked out, the silence that followed, the way Grandma said she had troubles, but never explained. Now she understood. "I asked Walter to stay away. I told him if he truly cared, he would protect you from a distance, let you grow up without his world in your shadow. I don't know if he kept that promise, but if you are reading this now, it means he left you something, and maybe he found the courage I didn't." Zari closed the letter slowly. Her throat felt tight, her chest heavier than ever. But something inside her felt clearer. Her mother hadn't lied to her to be cruel. She had tried to protect her. From herself, from judgment, from the storm of being caught between two worlds. Zari looked down at the envelope. There was something else inside. She reached in and pulled out a small photo. Her mother, younger, holding baby Zora in her arms on a hospital bed. And beside her, Walter Harrington, sitting at her side, looking scared, but smiling, like he already knew he'd missed something important, and was trying to hold on before it slipped again. Zari traced her mother's face with her thumb, then folded the photo and slipped it into her pocket. She stood up and walked out of the room. No tears, not anymore. She wasn't running from the truth. She was walking in it now. 3 weeks later, the man who once owned half of Manhattan opened his eyes in a quiet recovery room in New York. Sunlight poured through the window. Nurses walked by without rushing. Machines beeped, slow and steady. No chaos, no turbulence. Just breathe. Walter Harrington looked older now, pale, fragile. Not like the photographs in the business magazines, not like the man whose handshake could once flip a stock price. He turned his head slowly and saw her, Zari, sitting in the corner, reading the same old book with the photo tucked between the pages. He smiled faintly. "You came." She didn't smile back, but she didn't leave either. "That day on the plane," she said softly, "when you collapsed, why did you drop that photo?" Walter stared at the ceiling. "Because I knew I was out of time, and I couldn't carry the truth one more mile." Zari closed the book. "Why me?" He turned to her. "You remind me of your mother," he whispered. "The way you moved, the way you looked at me without fear. She had that same fire." Zari leaned forward. "You weren't there for her." "I wasn't brave enough." "You let a black woman raise your daughter alone. You let a child grow up thinking her real father was dead." "I know." "You let people believe our story wasn't worth telling." Walter's voice cracked. "I'm trying to make it right now." Zari stood, and for a long moment said nothing. Then she pulled something from her bag, a folded newspaper. She dropped it on his chest. Front page, Walter Harrington, to step down, leave majority of fortune to unknown minor. His eyes widened. "You—" "I used the key," she said. "The account transfer you signed after the plane. Your assistant emailed me the documents. I wanted you to have it." Zari crossed her arms. "Number. You wanted to feel less guilty before dying." Walter blinked back tears. "And you accepted it anyway." "I didn't do it for money," she said. "I did it for my mom. For every black woman who had her story erased." He nodded slowly. "What will you do with it?" he asked. Zari's voice was firm. "Start a foundation. In my mother's name. Scholarships. Legal aid for single black mothers. Emergency housing. Real action." Walter closed his eyes, a tear slipping down his cheek. Zari turned to leave. At the door, she paused. "I'm not your daughter by accident," she said, "but I'm not your daughter by default either. You lost the right to claim that." He opened his mouth to speak, but she stopped him. "Just listen." She pulled the photo out of the book, held it up. "Do you see this?" He nodded. "She died alone. And that's on you. All your money, all your power. None of it could bring her peace." Walter broke. His body shook in the bed. Zari didn't cry. She walked away slowly, her back straight, her chest proud. Down the hallway, past the nurses, past the reporters waiting outside who didn't know she was the girl behind the headline. She stepped into the sunlight and breathed. Weeks passed. The foundation launched. The media tried to chase the mystery girl behind the inheritance. She stayed quiet, except when it mattered. One day, she sat in a gym in Baltimore watching a group of black girls take free self-defense classes sponsored by her foundation. She handed out books, new ones, no missing pages, no lies tucked inside. A woman with braids asked her, "You really saved that billionaire's life?" Zari looked at her and smiled for the first time. "No," she said. "I saved mine." And then she picked up a clipboard and walked into the next room, where a dozen more girls were waiting to learn how to fight back. Not with fists, but with truth, with history, with identity. Because she wasn't a secret anymore. She was the storm. And her story, the one they tried to bury, now had an army reading every word.